I'm Chuck Hindman. I'm chair of the Homeless Alliance, Walla Walla Alliance for the Homeless. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight and for considering what we can do in our community to make our community have fewer homeless folks and more resources to help them. The Alliance was organized July 6th of last year, so we're about 9 months old. And our goal was to do everything we could to help reduce homelessness in Walla Walla. We are very much aware that we are not the only ones. Just across the street is the shelter for victims of domestic violence. If you go down Birch Street about 5 blocks, there's the Christian Aid Center. If you keep going that direction, you're going to run into the VA hospital and new homeless housing that is being built as we speak. If you go that way a little bit, you come to Lincoln High School, and you'll see the current location of the health center, which will be torn down, we hope, when funding is available, and rebuilt as an expanded health center and 4 beds for homeless youth. This church, about 9 years ago, started hosting the transition program for those getting out of prison called the STAR Project, Successful Transition and Recovery. That program's offices have now relocated to Wellington Street, but we still host a dinner here every month. And that program is doing a whole lot for a very difficult group to house, those who have a felony. And not a lot of landlords want to house them. And we've got Housing Authority and Blue Mountain Action Council and County Health Department all working to reduce homelessness. The Alliance is not interested in duplicating what any of those groups are doing, but we knew that there were things that fell through the cracks. There were people that were not being served, that there was more need than there was even some of the great groups that are serving. So we began to identify unmet needs. To date, we've created, we have some mailboxes that are available for homeless folks who need an address. We have a shower ministry every Monday morning. It happens to be here at this church. We have a laundry program once a month that teams with a similar laundry program sponsored by Amazing Grace Nazarene Church. We're advocates for public restrooms that were open 24/7. There are now 2 of them downtown. They're porta potties, and the city council is monitoring that to see if maybe there's an approach to having permanent restrooms that are open 24/7. We are in the process of looking at a place where people can safely store backpacks, which is another real need if you're homeless and you carry around a backpack all day and you're labeled because you're somebody with a backpack. And we've got some other things in the wind, but our big dream is Madison Park. Tiny homes with a commons area where there are restrooms, showers, kitchen facility, laundry facility, a main office, and another office where social workers can come in and meet with people on site. That is our big dream. And that's why we're excited whenever we have a chance to talk to folks who are interested in what they can do. Now, before we go on, I want to acknowledge that I'm not the only one working with the Alliance for the Homeless. If you are part of the steering committee or the work of one of the projects of Alliance for the Homeless, would you please stand at this time so we can acknowledge your work? These are folks that have been working hard for about 9 months, and we want to thank you for being here. But a few people, of course, can't do it. It's a community effort that's going to make the difference. From the very beginning, we began to look at resources on what to do in terms of developing low-cost housing for people that didn't have housing. And one of our models, there was a book called Tent City Urbanism, where a project that had started with some people, an organized encampment of tents, moving to tiny homes, and the kind of project that we began to consider here. One of the prime movers, there were 5 of these going on about the same time in the country and coming online in 2013. One of the prime movers of these was a place called Opportunity Village in Eugene. And one of the leaders of that group is Dan Bryant. He was pastor of First Christian Church in Eugene. He's now half-time pastor of First Church in Eugene and half-time executive director of what's called Square One Villages. Dan has learned a lot in the last 3 years about housing, and so we're blessed to have him here tonight. And at this time, I want to invite Dan to come and share with you some of the things that Eugene hopefully can tell us about homelessness and what we might learn here in Walla Walla.
Thank you, Chuck. It really is an honor and a privilege to be here to share with you something that is very dear to my heart. The reason for this trip is that I was invited to speak yesterday at a city managers conference in Skamania, and it so happened the city manager from Walla Walla was there. Got a chance to meet with him and chat with him a bit, so he's already heard this presentation, and went up from there and gave the same presentation in Yakima. Have a very similar group with a similar vision, actually a bigger vision even, working very hard there. And I told that group, it was kind of funny because we were meeting at what used to be First Christian Church in Yakima. It's now Vineyard, Church of Vineyard. But the building there is very similar to the building where I serve. It's called an Akron plan. And if anyone's from this church knows the history of this building, it's also built on the Akron plan. And I told them, that's kind of a scary thing because I'm speaking here in a sanctuary. I'm a preacher by trade. I just might launch into a sermon, But at any rate...
Help him, Lord.
Yeah. So very much at home. But because I am a preacher, I need a text to work with. So my text this evening is taken from Dorothy from the Gospel of Oz. Click your heels with me 3 times and say, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home." Indeed, right? Because home is, where everything that is so important to us, all of our connections, our friends and family. Well, it just so happened it was my brother that was introducing me at Skamania because he used to be a city manager, and he took me up on a hike above the Columbia yesterday morning. But the real reason I put this picture in there was just in case we have any Cougar fans present tonight. But now I've just torpedoed my whole presentation. But speaking of family, I want to go back to our roots, to what our family used to look like. We've improved a little bit over the years, but consider what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal world. What defines our humanity? And so from our days as cave dwellers to the present, we have built homes for ourselves on every continent with whatever materials was at hand, a place to be. a place where we could seek safety from the elements, where we could fix our meals, where we could raise our families from the lowlands to the highlands. We have made our abode on this earth. And whether we are in a community of thousands or in the home of our dreams in the countryside, maybe it's not this home, but consider the view out the window, the view out the wall, the view through the roof, whatever the case may be. But, our home is our castle. The Roman philosopher Cicero wrote, "What more sacred, what more strongly guarded by every holy feeling than one's own home?" And yet, of all the animal species, only human beings have no natural home in this world, right? And so we make our home for ourselves as best we are able, some more able than others. But being a preacher, I do like to quote Jesus. And Jesus said, "Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but only the Son of Man," one interpretation of that is, in other words, only humanity, "has no place where to lay his head." In other words, as historical scholar John Dominic Crossan says, there is something cosmically unjust in the fact that only human beings can be homeless. So simply put, homelessness is a justice issue. For without adequate housing for all of the members of our community, there is a basic injustice built into the system that deprives people from the opportunity to seek those unalienable rights penned by Thomas Jefferson into our Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And indeed, I would suggest to you that homelessness is perhaps the greatest injustice we have faced as a nation since Dr. King led those marchers across the Selma Bridge. So imagine what it is like to be without a home, to have no place where you can be, no place to cook your meals, no place to keep your stuff, no place to sleep, no place to bathe, no place to change your clothes, even to keep a toothbrush. And indeed, a place just for your stuff is a huge problem that the homeless face. And there's often a stigma and a shame that comes with being homeless. But the real shame is that we have made it nearly impossible for the poorest of the poor to live with any dignity among us. Meanwhile, instead of providing shelter for the unhoused, we spend public dollars to put up barriers wherever the unhoused go to find relief from living outdoors. From the boulders that have been placed under the bridges in my community to the 2x4s attached to benches in public parks, because heaven forbid that anyone lie down on a bench, or even benches and picnic tables removed from public parks, as I heard has happened here very recently. Not to mention the ways in which we make it illegal to be homeless through ordinances that punish people for just being in our community without a place to call home other than that spot by the river or under the bridge. Places that we are increasingly making off limits. And then we wonder why we have so many homeless people in our parks and public squares. So when we fence out the places where people seek out shelter, where do we think they are going to go? They have to sleep somewhere. So in the community where I come from, Eugene, we have one shelter bed for every 3 to 4 people unhoused on the streets of our community. And I know that the ratio is not quite as bad in this community, but still, you have a significant problem here as well, particularly when you consider the size of the community. And homelessness is not just a problem for the unhoused, it has an impact on all of us. I think that's why, so many people are here tonight. And consider that more than a third of those who live on the streets in most communities are there because of a mental health issue. So would anyone blame the mentally ill for a condition with which they were either born or was the result of a traumatic injury to their psyche? That county jails today are the #1 provider of mental health services in most communities is not an indictment on the mentally ill, it is an indictment on society. So I ask you, who is more guilty? The mentally ill in our jails, or those who create the system with too few alternatives that puts them there? Drug and alcohol addictions, of course, are an issue. But consider that for many decades now, those issues are considered by the medical community not as failures of morality or will, but as ailments requiring treatment for both the individual as well as for the good of the community. So why then do we expect addicts to magically quit their addictions before we will provide them with a place to live? I mean, does anyone think that your addiction is going to get better, right, by living on the street? Indeed, both in the case of mental health as well as addictions, those problems become worse. And as I've learned through the work that I've done, is one person put it to me, you know, life on the street is so crappy. I don't think that was the word she used. Fill in the blank. You know, why wouldn't I take something that makes me feel better? Right? So, and then there are those with neither addictions nor mental illness who are homeless simply by the virtue of their poverty, along with the high cost of housing. And HUD released a study just this last year showing that 1 in 4 renters pay half of their income on housing. And keep in mind, anytime you pay more than a third of your income on housing, it's considered to be unsustainable. And among those who earn the federal minimum wage, fortunately not the case for us in the Northwest, it's 70% that spend half of their income on housing. That's over 11 million Americans who are at the risk of becoming homeless for no other reason than they cannot afford their rent. So on the way here, driving up, I was listening to NPR and heard a story of the author of the book Evicted, isn't it, by Desmond.
Matthew Desmond.
Matthew Desmond. And I didn't know about it until I heard this story, so I'm going to have to now get the book and read it. But he was sharing that there are 1 million evictions on average in this country every year. Most of those, of course, for failure to pay rent. Why? Simply because they don't have the ability, because we lack sufficient affordable housing. And it's a huge shortage in our country, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But I want to be clear, because this is really critical. If you take nothing else away tonight, take this away. The problem is not the homeless. The problem is the lack of shelter for those who cannot provide their own. The problem is the lack of adequate treatment options for those with addictions they cannot control. The problem is an inadequate mental health system to provide for the most vulnerable of our citizens. The problem is dysfunctional families with too few places to go for help and a dysfunctional system with too few people to provide the assistance needed. In other words, it's not their problem. It's our problem, right? We are the ones who need to change. That's a fundamental shift in thinking that is instrumental to solving the challenge that we all face. One of the ironies is that it actually costs us more to leave someone who is chronically homeless on the street than it does to provide them housing and support. A 2014 study in 3 Central Florida counties found that they were spending over $31,000 each on more than 1,500 individuals, whereas the cost to house them and to provide them supportive services would just be $10,000. And that study wasn't really anything new, because in 2009, there was a study in Los Angeles of over 10,000 homeless individuals, and they found that when they provided them support and housed them, they were spending just over $600 a month, but on the street, it was costing them just under $3,000 a month, 5 times as much when they weren't housed. And even that wasn't new, because in 2002, a study was done in New York City, and they found that they were spending over $40,000 per individual of the chronic mentally ill who are homeless. And for those who have no other choice, of course, you know, they're going to seek out shelter wherever they can, under the bridges, in our alleyways, or band together to form unsanctioned camps like this one in Eugene, forced to move over and over again just to find a place where they can be. Now, I serve a very historic downtown church in the heart of Eugene, celebrating our 150th year this year. I had absolutely no intention of developing a ministry to and with the homeless. Never saw that on my radar. But I've been there since 1991, and over the years, there have just been more and more people coming through our doors desperate for help. And we have started a number of different ministries to respond to the needs. We've been doing a clothing ministry for over 60 years now. I'll talk about some of the other things in a little bit, but one of the things we started a number of years ago was a free breakfast where we serve over 300 people every Sunday morning. And we started a walk-in ministry with volunteers, trained volunteers, and we're serving anywhere from 10 to 25 people a day. And through them all, we serve over 20,000 people. And getting to know their stories and hear their stories and the challenges that they face has really forced me to become more and more engaged in this issue. And so what I want to do tonight is just share with you the 6 approaches, very innovative approaches we have taken to our community, and particularly focus on the micro-housing. But like many communities, we have a gospel mission, just called the Eugene Mission, similar to the operation here. And in our case, it is the largest provider of emergency shelter in the state of Oregon. Has 450 beds. It includes a family shelter for women and children. Men have to stay separately in the men's unit. But they do such an excellent job that the community made a decision more than 30 years ago, before I came to the community, but I heard these discussions that said, we are going to leave the business of emergency shelter for single individuals, couples, people without children, to the mission. And we made no investment whatsoever in our infrastructure in the shelter business other than serving special needs. So we've done a good job with families, with people with brain injuries, to some extent with mental health issues, and domestic violence abuse. But we did nothing to respond to the issue of the single individuals and childless couples. And those numbers just continued to grow and to grow, overwhelming the mission. So we began a number of things. In 1991, we started a new family program because the family system wasn't sufficient. And we started a temporary shelter program for families in churches, where families would spend 1 week at a time at a church in the fellowship hall, basement, what have you, and they would move from church to church. And we served typically 10 to 12 families at a time during the school year, and it closes down during the summer. And that program is now in its 25th year, and it has become the entry point for families into our shelter system. It's run by St. Vincent de Paul with a small grant from the city, and it's been a very effective program. Then we started in 1997 the car camping program, a city ordinance that approved the use of vehicles, that made it legal to sleep in your vehicle, so long as it was in an approved site that was sponsored by a church, a business, a nonprofit, basically anyone with a parking lot. Originally could house up to 3 vehicles, now it's up to 6. Most of those vehicles are RVs. In some cases, if the individual only has a standard vehicle, then that's what they use. But in our case, we had trailers donated to us. So our church, that's been doing this since 1997, has served over 140 people in 18 years. The only cost to us has been the utilities. We allow them to hook up to our electricity. The porta potty services is provided by St. Vincent de Paul, again with a grant from the city. And all told, there are 25 different sites scattered around the city serving over 60 individuals. And I'm going to talk about these Conestoga wagons a little bit later, but this was a particular one that we built for a couple, a gentleman who was in a wheelchair and his wife, because it's a little larger than most Conestogas. Then in 2007, Major Thomas Egan, a Vietnam veteran, froze to death on the streets of Eugene in the middle of February, just 2 blocks from our mission. And in response, a coalition of citizens began organizing a warming center, and once again called upon churches to help out. And so we created the Egan Warming Center, we call it. I know you have a similar program here. We provide, using typically 6 churches, provide space for over 300 individuals on nights when it's below 30 degrees. And again, with help with a grant from the city to make that possible. So I love telling this story. Over Thanksgiving, we had a cold spell, and 6 nights in a row when it was below 30 degrees. But on the 6th night, Thanksgiving holiday weekend, we ran out of volunteers. They were simply worn out, and we had to close because it wasn't safe to run without adequate staffing. That word went out in the community. It was a big news, and it just so happened we had 2 training sessions scheduled the next week. We had 400 people come to each of those training sessions, including the police chief and his wife, who are now regular volunteers in our Egan Warming Center. And it just shows the compassion of the community to step up, to make a difference, to care for people. And I have no doubt that that program has saved a number of lives. The 4th program I want to talk about is our rest stops, which are legal camping spaces within the city on vacant property that allow up to 20 people per site. These are very clean, well-organized sites. We have 4 of them in operation. One of them, called the Nightingale Health Sanctuary, is intended for people with health issues, including addiction issues. Officially, it's the only what's so-called wet shelter that we have right now in our community. We have a nonprofit called Community Supported Shelters that runs 3 of the sites, and they designed and build these Conestoga wagons that are just very neat little units. Costs about $1,200 a piece to produce, have a bubble-wrapped insulation, vinyl top. This particular site is exclusively for veterans. It's on the property owned by the Mission. Why would you choose to be here in an unheated unit instead of going into the Mission where you've got heat and your food prepared and showers, right? Well, you know how many veterans have PTSD? And loud noises and all kinds of things set them off. They much prefer this than living in a shelter where they're around a bunch of other people. And so it's just a much better situation for those who struggle with certain mental health issues. And it's just really wonderful to see these. Our city and our county is very pleased with them because they look neat. And we have this image of campsites run by the homeless as being messy affairs because typically they're not as well organized. These are very neat, well organized, very well run, and I think most of the city sees this as a very successful program. So in spite of all of these efforts, we still have about 60% of the homeless in our community that remain unsheltered on any given night. And to make matters worse, the Mission made a decision a couple years ago to become exclusively clean and sober, meaning they do drug testing and alcohol testing, and resulted in the immediate eviction of over 100 individuals that are now back on the street. I don't fault the Mission for that anyway. They are a great partner to work with. And I fully understand the reason why they had to do that for the safety and the health of that program. But it created a crisis for our community. At the same time, we were cleaning up some of the wetlands around and forced people to come out of those wetlands. And so we were suddenly inundated with about 200 more homeless than we had prior to those things happening. So a number of folk began to organize and say, we've got to come up with yet some even new models, new ideas. And so the 5th initiative is our tiny house village called Opportunity Village Eugene, and I've got a short video that tells you about it.
It's a gated community. It's a gated community for the homeless.
It's called Opportunity Village. It's transitional housing for the homeless, and it's unlike almost any other in the country.
They're like cute little miniature houses, and I think it's something that the average person can relate to.
Andrew Hindman is an urban planner recently out of college and author of a book about tent cities. He spearheaded the design of Opportunity Village and calls the miniature houses bungalows.
While it may not be much, just having a small place to call your own is a pretty important thing, no matter how small it is.
It's a heck of a lot better than sleeping under a bridge.
This is Pastor Dan Bryant, senior minister of the First Christian Church in Eugene, Oregon. He's the president of the board at Opportunity Village. He also has individual shelters for the homeless on church property. Conventional development of low-income housing costs on average about $200,000 per unit. They're a little larger, of course, and they have indoor plumbing and electricity. But all the little houses here, all 30 of them, added together, cost less than half of one federally funded unit. And they didn't cost taxpayers a single dime.
Gotta learn how to share food here, so we got 2 fridges here, 30 people.
The village has a community kitchen where residents can cook their own meals. It may be outdoors, but it's spotless. Individual units don't have electricity, but that's a small problem for people who have been sleeping in dark, shadowy places. People like Robin.
Because what I got now is I got it hooked up, my light's hooked up. So I have lights running off of 18-volt batteries.
Those people that think that this would be a good idea can get a show of hands.
This is another unique aspect to Opportunity Village that organizers say was influenced by the Occupy movement.
And everyone's required to attend a village meeting. And all decisions are made in that village meeting. And so that's where everything's dealt with. And so the whole village, I mean, it's, you know, democracy at its most basic level.
This is Catherine. She likes that residents have a say.
So it gives you a chance to have a voice, you know, you don't feel like nobody's listening to you. You feel like you have some control over your life.
There's some well-worn faces here, but there are plenty that look like your neighbors. Tony, for instance, lost her job and then everything else. Now she's employed as a caregiver.
It's my own little place where I can regroup and get my paperwork ready and get ready for work. And we have showers here that we share and wash our clothes here, and I'm able to get to work and look clean and presentable.
Catherine and Ron Griffith moved in here after she lost her job and the roof fell in.
I kept saying it couldn't get any worse, but then it kept getting worse. I tell people at the beginning of April of last year, I had a 3-bedroom home, everything that goes with that. My 2 adult children were living with me, and I had a mother, and we thought everything was good. By the end of May, I had none of that. It was all gone by the end of May.
Now Catherine has a job, and she and Ron live in an apartment downtown.
Coming here and things just start falling into place, and, you know, and now we're successful members of the community.
The village has been such a success, the city extended its lease. The next project will be called Emerald Village. There, the bungalows will be twice as big. These will be for the homeless who have a job but don't make enough to rent or own a place of their own. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Lucky Severson in Eugene, Oregon.
So that is about half of the full video that appeared on PBS in October of 2014. So just say a little bit more about our nonprofit. Our mission is to create a new model of housing that gives the unhoused a place to belong and a new opportunity to start at square one, hence the name Square One Villages. And I want to spend more time talking about it because it's going to be more similar to the Madison Park project. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our next project as well. This work has attracted all kinds of attention nationwide, not only PBS, we were featured on MSNBC, on the CNN's website for the 10 most innovative designs, and even in the London Guardian. We opened in August of 2013, started with a group of 14 people, built the project over 9 months with the aid of those residents as well as a lot of volunteers. It's become a very attractive little community of about 33 to 35 people. The average stay can be anywhere from 6 to 15 months. Some people as short as 2 or 3. Some have been over 2 years. We don't have a maximum stay. Instead, we focus on the transition plan. Every villager has to write out their transition plan. They meet with a caseworker, not employed by us, but from another agency that helps them develop that plan. And then we try to provide them support for that. And so it depends on what the plan is. For instance, we have one young woman whose plan was to get her college degree. And so she's working hard at Lane Community College on her degree. I think she's on track to graduate this year, but she's working her plan, and I'm no doubt she'll be successful once she gets that degree, be able to go out and compete on the job market. Over 50 people have transitioned out since we began. 2/3 of those into other permanent housing. For the first couple of years that we were open, we only had 2 people who got Section 8 vouchers because they just weren't available for the most part. More recently, especially the Veterans Program, the batch vouchers have assisted a number of our veterans in particular to help them move out. And as Lucky said in that PBS video, everyone is required to attend those weekly meetings. They actually have to do 10 hours of service in the village, 8 of those hours at the front gate. That front gate's staffed 24/7, as well as a couple hours doing basic chores like cleaning the restrooms and the facilities. And not only does the Opportunity Village provide those kind of opportunities for people to work on their education, to do the job searching, or like Tony, to get her shower so she's ready to work. But we've had some really wonderful things happen, like the couple that you just saw in that video were married at Opportunity Village, one of 2 couples that whose weddings I've had the privilege to perform. It's one of the benefits of being an ordained clergy member as well as a director of the nonprofit. So just the basic numbers at the village, we actually have 29 units. We're authorized to have 30, but we're holding one open. And as Lucky said, just over $200,000. Half of that was in-kind donations. We actually billed it for less than $100,000 in cash. Our utilities runs about $1,200 a month, so if you amortize our expenses over 5 years, it costs us $5 a night to build it. The villagers pay $1 a night, so our net cost is just $4. We think it's probably one of the most cost-effective, cost-efficient programs in the country. And it's working. The University of Oregon, we lost our projector. There we go. The University of Oregon did a study, a research group, the University of Oregon did a study, and they surveyed the residents and the businesses around us and found that 90% of our neighbors support the work that we are doing. They checked in with both the residents of the Rest Stop and Opportunity Village, and the residents told them that these places make them feel more, it increased their self-confidence, made them feel more independent, gave them a sense of community, and more than 70% of the residents indicated that staying in these programs is helping them to transition into permanent housing. So that's the goal, and we are achieving that with these folk. And most importantly, they concluded that this program is working, and that is perhaps the most important conclusion of it. So you met Andy Hindman in that interview. Andy just graduated before he came to Eugene with his master's from the University of Cincinnati in urban planning. He actually spent a summer living in tent cities, and as Chuck indicated, he wrote this book, Tent City Urbanism, that includes Opportunity Village as well as some other programs in it, and it's just a great resource, and he's available to help provide technical assistance for other groups such as the group here. So the biggest problem we have had is helping people to transition out because there just is not enough affordable housing. We've had a number of people that they've gotten jobs, they've got income, they've qualified now for disability, but they can't afford anything unless they get a Section 8 voucher. And even those with Section 8 vouchers have difficulty finding a place that will take that voucher because the rent is higher than what the voucher is authorized for. So when you go to our housing authority, to go to their website and you look at the wait times that they post there, you can see why. This is the second largest housing authority in the state of Oregon. They maintain 1,000 publicly financed affordable housing units. They provide 3,000 Section 8 vouchers. And on their website, they list the wait time. So if you're a family and you need a 3-bedroom apartment, the wait time is 1 year. But if you need a 2 or a 4-bedroom apartment, the wait time is 2 to 3 years. But here's the real kicker, and this was the eye-opener. It was this aha moment for us. If you are a single individual or you are a couple with no children, you just need a single-bedroom apartment or you need a studio apartment, cheapest, smallest thing available, the wait time was 5 years, and they have since closed the waiting list because it was too long. So you can't even get on the wait list anymore. And from my conversations that I've had so far in this community, I think you have a similar problem here. Why? Because we put most of our public dollars into family housing, and we should, right? We want to provide for our children, but the problem is those single individuals then are literally left in the cold. And so for my friends like Juan and Rhonda here, just a wonderful couple, they have been stranded now. They've part of our original group, and they cannot find any place to live. Now, Juan has an incredible story. So I was, when we built these things, we couldn't find a roofer, and we just had tarps over them. And I said, all right, with all of my ministerial training, I'm going to get up there and start roofing, to get it done. And so I'm up there, and Juan is watching me, and he perceives I could use some help. I don't know why he had that perception. But he climbed up and began helping me. It turns out he was a professional roofer by trade. And so when we finished, this was the first one that we roofed. It was our gatehouse. Juan went on to roof most of the other places with some help from the other villagers, and it went a lot faster without me for some reason. Juan qualified for his disability about 4 months ago. He has advanced COPD. He is now on oxygen, has a breathing machine at night. This is the last roof Juan will ever be on. And then there's Joe. Joe had been a resident at the village for a couple of months, is one of our oldest residents. And he came up to me one day when I was there at the village, so excited because he wanted to introduce me to his wife. I said, Joe, you have a wife? How did I not know this? And well, it turns out she had a terminal illness and was being cared for at a nursing home. And Joe's one request of us was, would it be okay if she could come and stay with him in his bungalow so that she could die peacefully in his arms? And we had to say, Joe, no, we're just not prepared for that. We don't have the services that she'll need, but we can help you spend more time with her in the rest home. And indeed, a couple of months after this picture was taken, she did die. And shortly after that, there was a family that was helping her and were so taken in by Joe, they took him in, and so that he could live in their home, rent a room from them. Well, so why is it that people like Joe and his wife and Juan and Rhonda cannot find an affordable place to live? So when you look at the way we build public housing, affordable housing, you can see why. Simply put, the supply has not kept up with the demand. The cost, as was mentioned in that video, for most affordable housing project in this country is upwards to $200,000 per unit. And case in point is a new project being built in Eugene, Bascom Village, by St. Vincent de Paul. Very attractive project, blends in well in the community. And it's being built in 2 phases for $17 million that will house 101 individuals. 101 households, families as well as individuals, so various size apartments. Has some really nice amenities, community center, laundry facilities and the like. But that comes to $169,000 per unit. So these are wonderful things. We need more of these. I'm a big supporter of these kinds of projects. People should have these kinds of projects. But here is the problem. In our community, when we did the point-in-time count, we identified 697, or about 700 chronically homeless individuals. People have been homeless for a year or more, or homeless on 4 occasions in the prior 3 years with some other presenting condition. So if we build apartments like this, strip out all the nice amenities, don't provide the playground, the laundry facilities and what have you, get it down to just $125,000 per unit, pair people up 2 per unit, it would cost us $44 million just to care for those 700 individuals. It took us years to develop Bascom Village and to find that $17 million. People like Joe and Juan do not have the time to wait for something like this. And that's not counting the 10,000 people that we know become situationally homeless in our community during the year, and are homeless for shorter periods of time. So clearly, we will never be able to provide shelter for everyone in need until we find a way to build true affordable housing that does not require massive amounts of government assistance. So we are challenging people to dream big with tiny houses that are safe, secure, and significantly more affordable. So enter Emerald Village Eugene, a new affordable housing project unlike any in the country. We think we are the first in the country to do this. It is a project of our nonprofit in which we will build 22 super affordable tiny homes, 150, 250 square feet. We built a prototype that's at Opportunity Village. These are the smallest unit you can build under the 2015 International Residential Code and be considered a dwelling unit. It includes a full bath, a little kitchenette, place for a bed, chair, desk, fully plumbed and heated. We have 12 architects working for us. I went to a friend of mine who's an architect and I challenged him, said, I want you to design this, build it for me, donate it to the village. I want you to find 4 of your colleagues to do the same. He's a bit of an overachiever. He found 6 or 7 more, and then they invited me to do a presentation to the American Institute of Architects, and 5 more joined up. We now have 12 architects working for us, designing these wonderful little homes that are going to be very well designed. We're building them to a 50-year standard. The residents will pay $250 to $350 a month, so it's fully self-supporting. That includes all fees and utilities. The designs are very simple to maximize use of volunteers to keep our labor costs down, and they will all be built with less than $15,000 in material costs. We're working very closely with the city on code issues to make sure it meets all code. And the architects that don't have their own build capacity are being paired with contractors so that these 12 units will all be donated to us. The nonprofit is paying for the property and the site development foundations, and then we're going to have to pay for another 10 units to get us up to that 22. We have 1 unit that's actually ADA accessible, and depending on how many applicants we have that will be in wheelchairs, we may build more than 1. And so here's what's really exciting about this project, because unlike most affordable housing projects, the residents of this project, Emerald Village, will not simply be paying rent. They will actually be members of a village cooperative in which they are buying a share of the village, so that they have an asset that will accrue interest in time as a reward for making their payments on time, that they can cash out if and when they leave. But it's permanent housing. They don't have to. But, if situation improves, they want a bigger home, when they move, they've got that asset that they can take with them. We purchased just over 1 acre of property and have laid out our plan. We're about ready to submit the site plan to the city. This project will cost $1.5 million, including the value of all the donations. That's less than $60,000, all included, including the price of the land. That $17 million project I showed you, that does not include the price of the land. So it's about 1/3 to 1/4 of the cost of traditional affordable housing projects. So we believe very deeply that just because someone is poor does not mean they should have poor housing, or worse, no housing. Our goal is to enable many of our citizens who live with very minimal incomes to live affordably with the pride of their own homes. We want to create a miniature form of the American dream so that the residents of this project will not only have the pride and the responsibility, but also, most importantly, the benefit of home ownership. And this will just be the first of many such projects. We actually have received a $150,000 grant to do the pre-development cost on the next project after this one, and in the process to capture all the information and to develop a toolbox that will be available to other communities that provide you the step-by-step instructions of how to go through the planning issues, code issues, political issues, funding issues, and the like to do your own project. All right, we want to build sufficient housing for all the people in need, that they can have safe, efficient, attractive, affordable housing for everyone who desires and deserves a place to call home, and it all begins at square one. So thank you very much, and if there's time for some questions, I'll be glad to answer those. Chuck?
I want us to do a little tag team here, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions that are commonly asked, and then I'm going to allow some of you to ask some questions. The first question that I don't have to ask if you read the newspaper is question, won't this just attract more homeless to our community? And if you read the newspaper article, Dan, you did some of his response, but Dan, you want to give your brief answer here?
So this is the headline in the Yakima News this morning, you know, can it work here? And I get this question everywhere I go. So how can it be possible when all of these communities are doing this kind of thing that we're all attracting the homeless, right? And this is a wonderful area. I would not mind to live here, but I just honestly don't think that it's a big attraction for most homeless folk. And you're right. And you heard me say the 20,000 people that come through our building every year. I have yet to have one say, Pastor, would you buy me a bus ticket to Walla Walla? Because that's where I want to live. So I'm sorry. I just don't think that you're attracting those folk. I will say, I do understand where some of that perception comes from, because you hear someone with an accent that's obviously not from your area. Like you heard Catherine, she's very southern. She's obviously not from Eugene. And so you have that impression she came here, you know, because we have these great services. She came here because her mother-in-law lives here. When they lost their house, they came and they thought they had a job lined up for her. They came for the job, they came because they had family, they were housed for the first few months until their resources ran out. She did not come here because of the homeless, you know, all the great services. And that's been my experience in most cases. Sure, there is a transient population. It's less than a fourth. In our community, we know the physical address of every single person on our streets who is homeless who provide that, and that's 93% of the people. Every time they come for a service, they're asked to give their previous address. We know that 72% came from our community. 7% came from elsewhere in the county, 9% came from elsewhere in the state, 7% refused to answer the question. And when I talked to your city manager yesterday, he said, yeah, that sounds about the same for this community. So there's a small element, yeah, and they're probably the more visible element. And there is truth that if you live in a rural community where there are no services, when you lose your housing, where are you going to go? In most cases, you're going to come into where the services are. However, in our case, in Veneta, where our next project is about 12, 15 miles outside of Eugene. They are working with us to start a project there because they have had a homeless community living in their community for over a decade. They're not coming into Eugene. They're from Veneta. They prefer to stay in that little community. So, in most cases, it simply isn't true.
Thank you. The next question is, if you get a lot of these low-income people together, won't you create a situation that makes it unsafe for the people that live nearby?
So first of all, the projects we're talking about are not a large number. This project that the good folks here are designing is much smaller than ours. In our case, we had that concern. The business right across the street was concerned, but didn't oppose it, but said, you know, I just want to say I'm concerned. Now they have absolutely no concern. There's been zero issue. In fact, if you look at the police logs for the number of police calls, we have one of the safest spots in that whole neighborhood. And I had one police officer who told me, our only problem with you folk is that you don't give us enough business. Right? So that has not been a problem. The folks who live in our village want to be good neighbors. They want to be good community members. Most of those kind of problems come from a small percentage of folk who have serious issues. And even when you provide housing with those folks, you give them a place to live, then they're not in somebody else's neighborhood creating those problems. So it actually provides a way to contain those issues. And particularly with this kind of program where you're not serving large numbers of people coming through, you are only serving the residents. So you're talking about a small number and people who by and large want to be good neighbors and just need a little help to do that.
And by the way, that story is repeated at similar projects all around the country. We've read the research. Any questions that any of you want to ask? You'd stand, so it's, yes.
From a cost point of view, we've probably done the research on this, but if you were building a structure to house multiple families, what we call an apartment building, or used to be called a tenement or something like that, is probably cheaper. Now, I'm not saying it's a better idea, but could you comment
Sure.
on that?
So, yeah, the question is, would it be cheaper to build an apartment complex? Or for instance, one issue we looked at is just building duplexes or quads where you're sharing some walls and you can cut some costs down. Yeah, undoubtedly, there would be some savings. We decided not to for a couple of reasons. One, again, to maximize volunteer labor, to keep the construction simple. And actually, a lot of our construction will be done off-site in a shop where our volunteers are working out of the rain, and we bring the pieces onto site and assemble it. So that's one answer. And then there's just the attraction of having your own little unit. But I certainly concede that it might be possible to lower the cost even further with some other creative techniques. It may be, but we also know we're already lowering the costs significantly just by the virtue of size. At some point, we hope to actually try some of these same principles out with that in a future project, and we'll have to do, you know, the kind of study to see. But when we also looked at some of the other challenges of doing that, there were some other costs associated with that that kind of mitigated that. So, but I do think, yeah, it's possible to even have further savings. Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody have? Yes. Go ahead.
What do you do when neighbors are resistant to the project coming in? There's a wonderful site in the town. Some of the neighbors are concerned about things that are probably irrational and more fear-driven than.
Sure. So what do you do about the neighbors, and particularly, yeah, the fears and concerns? We spend a lot of time listening to those concerns, first of all, in both of our projects. And we tried to answer as rationally as we could. And the ones that are just emotional, I get, you know, you probably can't. But for instance, in dealing with behavior issues and what plans did we have in place to deal with those issues? And then vetting. One of the things we offered to our neighborhood is that, well, we would like a representative from your neighborhood to be on our vetting committee to help choose who the residents are. You know, when do you get an opportunity to choose your neighbor, right? So we're giving them that opportunity. The other thing we've done is we're setting up procedures to have a council with a neighborhood liaison. So if there's a concern from the neighborhood, it gets reported to that council, so there's communication back and forth. And then in this particular site, and I'm looking at it, it's a well-contained site. You know, the neighbors across a very busy street. I think it will improve that neighborhood, because vacant lots do not do neighborhoods any good. When you have a lot that's occupied with eyes on it, it actually cuts down on problematic behaviors. So I think it would actually be an improvement. And what the designs I've seen, this will be a well-designed, attractive thing that will improve the look of that particular lot. But you're not going to convince everyone. I mean, that's a reality, but you just have to listen and do your best.
One more question? Yes.
I've noticed that the structures are on concrete blocks, so there's cold air underneath, and that would be a cold floor in the wintertime.
Sure. And I mean...
And is there R60 insulation? Is it foam in the roof?
Right.
What are they doing to make them as...
Yeah, so what do we do? In a particular case, our units are all built on blocks.
Possible.
Right, in the insulation. So thank you for that question. So these units are insulated, very well insulated. The nice thing about a small unit is it takes very little to heat it. You can heat it, for the most part, with a 60-watt bulb because of the small space and the good insulation. We had to build these on block because we don't own the land. In our first project, Opportunity Village. So we had to build it in such a way that we can move it. At some point, we know the city's going to say to us, we want our land back. It's city-owned land. We're going to have to pick it up and move it. Emerald Village will be on permanent foundations.
Okay,
And
so what about a temporary skirting just to seal that space, to give a dead air space?
yeah, there are other issues that there have been concerns about rodents.
Permanent if you put skirting up?
Yeah. There were other issues with us that became a concern, the rodents in that neighborhood, and once you conceal the space like that, it tends to have rodent problems, and so we were advised not to. I don't know, but the floors are insulated, so it's not a...
Also, a deadlock airspace that would work as a closet storage area, that would keep the air exchange from the
That's a good idea.
outdoor heat and cold
Yeah.
to a minimum. And what about solar panels? That would produce some electricity.
Yeah.
And also in the summertime, that produces a shading with a
Yep,
dead
yep,
airspace
yep.
between the roof and the solar panel. And you could possibly get some grants to help with that.
Thank you. That's an excellent idea.
We here at Madison Park are considering all of those things. Looks like we're going to be on concrete slabs, and it at the very least has to be fixed and has to be skirted. So there's some other things about that. We haven't finalized a design for the buildings. We know that it's going to look pretty much like this, but we haven't finalized the details. Our architect's been working on the site plan right now.